and welcome back to my channel. My name is Emily and I am the maker behind Magnus May Crochet. In today's video, we are going to be looking back and reflecting on my first year selling plushies at local markets. We will be talking about things like what I think went well, what I would like to change coming into my second market season, which is starting in just a couple weeks, and some of the lessons I learned along the way that first year. But before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to this channel, and you can also follow me on Instagram and TikTok at the links in the description below. Your support really does mean so much to me, and I am so appreciative of everyone who has been coming on this journey with me so far. And with that said, let's get started. I think we'll kick this off with a positive, get some positive vibes going here, and talk a little bit about what I think went well my first season. Overall, I was really happy with how my first year selling plushies at markets went. Over the course of the 3 markets that I did last year, I sold 223 plushies and I made a little over $2,800 in profit. Obviously, being my first year, I have nothing to compare that to, but I think considering this was my first year, I really was still kind of figuring out the whole process of selling at markets and just like running a small business in general. And the fact that I literally only did 3 markets last year, I am pretty happy with that end result. One of the things that I think worked really well for me this first year was I brought a lot of, shall we say, non-traditional market makes with me. They were at least patterns that I just haven't seen a lot of other vendors bring with them to their markets. For anyone new here, I will post some pictures of my work up on the screen so that you can get a sense of the types of plushies that I'm talking about. But if you are interested in seeing the full inventory that I brought to each of the markets I'm going to be talking about in this video, I do have market recap videos posted here on my channel for all 3 of these markets, so you're definitely welcome to check those out. I tended to bring a lot of more sewing intensive patterns with me to my markets. I think I've mentioned this before, but that's really just a personal choice. I just happen to really like making those patterns, so they're ultimately the plushies that end up coming with me to my markets. I really like getting that like real detailed look that you can't always get with some of the low or no sew patterns. I also work with the skinny chenille yarn line from Michaels for the vast majority of my plushies, and that's for a very similar reason. It's a size 4 weight, so you can get kind of that detailed look that you typically see with acrylic yarn, but it's chenille, so it still has that softness to it. And at the end of the day, I'm making plushies, so you know, I want those to still be soft and really huggable. And again, that's just a personal preference of mine. This is not meant to be like a PSA that everyone should be bringing sewing intensive plushies to their markets. That honestly might not even be feasible for a lot of people out there, particularly if you're doing a lot of markets. As any of the crocheters watching will be able to tell you, the more sewing there is involved in a project, the longer that project is going to take you. So these are by no means quick market makes that you're going to be able to sit down and bang out large quantities of plushies in one sitting. I only did 3 markets last year for my first season, and I'm only planning to do 2, possibly 3 markets this fall. And all of my markets are typically clustered very close together in either the summer or this year in the fall. So that leaves me the rest of the year to crochet and build up inventory, which puts me in a very different position than somebody who might be a full-time crocheter or otherwise is signed up for a lot more markets than I typically do. So that was a very long-winded way of saying that my takeaway here is not necessarily that everyone should be bringing sewing intensive projects with them, but that it can be good to have plushies that people don't often see when they go to local craft markets. At all 3 of the markets I did last year, there was at least one other amigurumi vendor there, if not more than that. But I didn't really have to worry about that because, well, one, I love to see other crochet artists work and I love supporting their small businesses too. But I also wasn't worried because there really wasn't a lot of overlap between the types of products that we were selling. We brought very different plushies, we had very different styles. I obviously can't speak for them, but I personally didn't find that having a couple other amigurumi artists at these markets really impacted my sales. And I do partially attribute that to the fact that we were selling very different products. Another thing that I think worked well for me this year was putting a lot of effort into my booth up front. Startup cost your first year can be really hard. You oftentimes have to upfront a lot or at least most of those costs before you ever even see a profit. Markets involve not just supply purchases, but you oftentimes need to invest in things like a tent if you're doing outdoor markets, tent weights, tables, tablecloths, things to display your items on. The list is honestly endless, and none of those things are cheap. But I do think biting the bullet and investing in my booth display really went a long way. This is an example of what my typical booth display looked like during my first year. I designed a logo on Canva, which, if you haven't seen my logo before, it is my profile picture across all of my social media platforms, including YouTube. I then pulled the colors from that logo and used them as kind of the inspiration for this booth design. So I used a lot of pinks and grays and whites for all my display items and my tablecloths, which really gave the booth a very cohesive aesthetic. It also provided a neutral kind of background. They're kind of more muted colors, which allowed the plushies to really stand out, which is the entire point of the booth, is to really sell the plushies to the customers. I think if I had used more brighter colors or a lot more colors to design my booth, that could have detracted from the plushies. They might have blended in more with the booth because I used bright colors for them. So I think having not just like the cohesive branding kind of color scheme, but just like a more muted and neutral backdrop really helped them stand out more. And I know a lot of people that came into the booth commented on that and just like the booth design in general. So I do know that this sort of cohesive look really did draw at least a few people into the booth. I also think having some branding like a logo and business cards and this banner that you can kind of see in the background also really helped a lot. As I'll talk about later in the video, at this point when I first really started selling at markets, I wasn't 100% sure that I really wanted to be full on running a small business. I was largely just doing crochet as a hobby, but looking for a way that I could kind of offload the giant plushie buildup that was happening in my apartment. But I still went ahead and designed a logo and business cards because it really does give the booth and just your business in general a more professional look, which I think does instill some confidence in your customer base. If anyone watching is just starting out on their business journey, I designed my logo on Canva. This isn't sponsored or anything, though Canva, if you ever do want to sponsor me, I wouldn't object. But I just really found their platform to be user-friendly and have a lot of different features that were helpful in designing print products. I actually only recently just signed up for their paid subscription. So up until pretty much a week or so ago, I was using their free version. And with that, I was able to design every print product that you see in my booth display. Okay, my next point is to share your business story if you have one, and to have some showstopper pieces in your booth display. I highly recommend having at least 1 or 2 larger plushies on display in your booth as kind of showstoppers. At my markets last year, I brought these 2 jumbo-sized dragons, and they were extremely popular. They drew so many people into the booth. This green dragon in particular was extremely popular. I think that was probably because he was closer to the front of the booth, so you could really see him from the exterior if you're just walking by. But there were even people that like almost literally ran into the booth to come look at him. These were obviously high-priced items, so there weren't likely a lot of people who were ultimately going to come in and end up purchasing them. But their job really wasn't to sell, their job was to bring people into the booth, because once you get people into your booth, they're then likely to look around at your smaller, less expensive items, and they may ultimately end up making a purchase. And like I said, these dragons really did their job. So if you are looking for ideas for some showstopper pieces that you could use at your markets, I would highly recommend these dragons. I will make sure that I have their pattern information included in the description. Despite being higher priced items, both of these dragons actually did end up selling at my markets last year, which brings me to the second point that I want to make, which is to not be afraid to share your business story if you have one. For any new friends here, Magnus May Crochet is named after my golden retriever, Maggie. Her full name was Magnus, and there was a Maggie May Crochet, I think, taken on one of the social media platforms. So we ended up with Magnus May. But Maggie was a huge fan of stuffies, plushies, all things stuffed animals. She was your girl for that. And she was very fascinated when I started to learn how to crochet amigurumi. Maggie unfortunately passed away when she was 12 and a half, which was right around the time that I was signing up for markets and kind of beginning this whole crochet business journey. So I named my business after her and her love for plushies. In my booth, I keep a little sign that looks like this by the checkout counter, which talks about the fact that Maggie is our namesake, a little bit about her, and I have some pictures on the sign of her as well. And tons of people will stop and read this sign, and then we'll get to talking about either Maggie or their dogs, which oftentimes leads into talking about my plushies and my crochet business in general as well. And this sign actually led to one of my largest sales last year, which was my green jumbo dragon. I have the full story included in my second market recap, which is up on this channel if you're interested in hearing more about this sale. But the short version is a woman was reading the sign about Maggie, and she started to get very emotional, and she cried out that she knew Maggie. And it turned out that she worked in Maggie's veterinary office, so she knew Maggie really well. And she ultimately ended up purchasing the green dragon for her daughter. So don't be afraid to put up a sign or talk to people who come into your booth about how you got started in your business, if you have a story behind that or a story behind your name, because people are really interested in that information and learning more about you. And you never know, it could end up leading to a really big sale. This last one probably isn't new information for anyone, but offering multiple payment options definitely leads to more sales. Some people don't carry cash, some just prefer credit cards or Venmo. So the more payment options that you have, the larger your potential customer base is going to be. I obviously accepted cash, and to do this, you probably want to invest in a cash box because that will lock and also have slots for each of the types of bills and coins that you bring. You're also going to want to stop at the bank before your market to get a variety of bills and coins so that you'll be able to make change for people, especially early in your market when you likely haven't made a lot of sales yet. I also have this square reader right here, which allows me to accept credit card payments. There are quite a number of different versions of the square reader, and they all offer different features. Some of them offer the ability to tap credit cards. Some, I think, even let you use Apple Pay. This is just the bare bones OG square reader, which really just limits you to swiping credit cards or typing in the credit card information into the Square app. But this one is free, so it's really great if you are just starting out on your business journey and don't have a lot of money to invest in some of the more fancy Square readers. I can't remember off the top of my head if you have to pay shipping for it, but the actual reader itself is free. So I do recommend this one for your first year, and then you can maybe upgrade in the future. Lastly, I offered Venmo, PayPal, and Cash App, though I may eventually get rid of Cash App because nobody used it at all, and I'm not very familiar with it. So I may ultimately reduce that to just Venmo and PayPal. I got this sign off of Etsy, which has my QR codes for all three of those apps that people can scan when they come up to the checkout counter. You don't even have to get this elaborate. You can just use the apps when people come up to checkout. I just thought it was really cute, and it did make checkout a little easier because people could just scan the QR code and then I wouldn't have to open the app. I'd just make sure that I got the payment notification before I handed them their bag. Well, I do think overall my first market season went really well, and I'm quite happy with it. There are still some things that I would like to change as I come into my 2025 market season and beyond. The first and most pressing issue that I need to change is my pricing. As was pretty much a running theme throughout the course of all three of my market recap videos that I have up on my channel, I severely underpriced myself this first market season. Some background for anyone who didn't see my intro video that I have posted on here, but I am currently working 2 jobs, and they're both very mentally taxing jobs. So I set out to kind of find a hobby or something that I could do in my free time that would be relaxing and kind of provide some stress relief, which is ultimately what led me to learn how to crochet. But because it's stress relief, I was crocheting pretty much anytime I had a free moment, and the plushies were really starting to build up in my 1-bedroom apartment. So the question then became, what on earth am I going to do with them all? I didn't really start out my first market season with the mindset that I really wanted to run like a full-on small business. I was mainly just looking to bring the plushies to some local markets, get them out of my apartment, and maybe earn back some of my yarn money. I wasn't really thinking about things like earning a profit or paying myself for my labor, anything like that. Instead, I just kind of took an estimated cost of my materials for each of the individual plushies and then added a little bit on top of that to maybe fund some future yarn purchases. Essentially, I was just pricing to fund my hobby. But I am investing a lot of time and effort into making all of these plushies, and I have found that I really do kind of enjoy running a small business. I really like going to the in-person markets. I'm kind of starting to think about maybe branching into selling on Etsy or some sort of online platform, and I've started to post my work on social media. So my headspace is slowly encroaching on the territory of actually running a small business. it would be kind of nice if down the road I could make enough that this could kind of become a second job instead of what it currently is, which is essentially a third job. So the one thing that I absolutely have to do this coming market season is to really sit down and seriously reevaluate the pricing that I have for each of the plushies that I bring to my markets, and make sure that I'm factoring in the time and labor that goes into making them and really pricing them at the value that they're actually worth, or as close to it as possible. If you have watched any of my market recap videos and you have any thoughts about what I should be pricing some of the plushies that I typically bring to my markets, I will take any advice in that area. I know there are like formulas out there for calculating what you should be pricing your handmade items, but it can be really hard for me working the two jobs and really just kind of crocheting whenever I have the time to figure out how many hours I actually invested into a particular plushie, because I'm never just sitting down and working on a single plushie at one time. I'm oftentimes not even working on the same plushie every single day. I tend to have to bounce around a lot. Like I might do all fins for all my like aquatic creatures one week and then move on to their bodies the next week. So those formulas don't really work for me, but at the end of the day, I really do have to figure something out with my prices and make sure that I'm doing a little bit better this coming market season with that. Another change I'd like to try and make this market season is to offer more of a variety of plushies. I did bring quite a number of plushies to each of my markets last year. I had at least 100 plushies, usually over 100 plushies at all three of the markets. And I did bring a wide array of different kinds of animals. So what I'm looking to have here is actually more color variants of each of the plushies that I bring to my markets. I tended to use a lot of pinks and purple yarns last year because I just really liked how they worked up with particular plushies. For example, with my monkeys, all of them were made out of this sort of pink speckled yarn, which is very girly and super cute, but I do want to be mindful of the fact that there are going to be customers out there who aren't fans of pink and purple. So I want to try and make sure that I have some blue color variants, some green color variants, or even just some like more natural, realistic animal color variants as well. I'd also like to try and add some plushies like maybe some dinosaurs or things like that for that very same reason. My first market for this upcoming season is actually in just a couple weeks. So I'm not entirely sure how realistic a goal this is going to be for my 2025 season. At least not for the September fair, because I am definitely already very behind schedule with that. But maybe I'll be able to start implementing it for the other fairs that I'm doing this fall, because I still have a little bit more time to prepare for those. To combat this issue, I'm thinking of also putting out like a little booklet with some pictures of my work and creating a QR code to a custom order form that people can scan if I don't have a color that they want, or they want a plushie with crocheted eyes, not the safety eyes, or if I'm just like all out of a particular animal that they really want. That way there's an alternative option available to customers, and I won't miss out on a sale, or they won't be forced to choose from what I have remaining on the table that may not be exactly what they want. This is another goal that may ultimately not get implemented this market season, but rather maybe something that I work on in future years. But there are some aspects of my booth display that I do want to change up. The first thing that I would like to change is I would like to either add more height to my booth display, like add some like shelving or more wooden crates on top of the tables, or even remove one of the tables and replace that with like taller shelving units. Because I do bring a lot of different kinds of animal plushies to my markets, and I want to make sure that I have the space to put at least one of each kind of plushie out on display so that people are able to see all of the options available to them. And even though I did have 3 tables, one of which is a long 6-foot table, I think those tables filled up really quickly, and I only had like 3 wooden crates in the back of my display as like shelves or additional height where I could stack more plushies higher up in the booth. So that's definitely something that I do want to try and change, if not this year, certainly next year and moving forward. The other thing that I do want to change that definitely is not going to be happening this year because it's a bit more of a financial investment, but this banner has got to change. It's not that I don't like the banner. I designed this logo, so I obviously really like how it looks, and it is really good quality. I do recommend the banners from Canva. It's the size of the banner that's the problem. It is the perfect length. It's 6 feet, which fits really nicely in the 10-foot tent. The issue is the height. When my mom and I are sitting behind the tables and it's really windy, that banner is like smacking us in the back of the head the whole time. And even when it's not windy, it comes down so low that it still really restricts the space that we have back there to move around, because we do have the tables set pretty far back in the tent to allow there to be more space for customers to move around and look at the different plushies. So I definitely want to change up the size of this banner at some point. The other thing that I want to change up, which is actually something that I have already changed by the time you are watching this video, if you tune into next week's market prep video, I will take you along on this process. But my manageable goal for this year was to redesign my business cards. So last year when I first started out, I really just had an email address, and I did have an Instagram account, but I really hadn't used it. So I just had those 2 things on my business cards. I didn't even think to put my name on them so that people would know who they're addressing an email to. So this year, I'm already out of business cards, so it was the perfect time to redesign them and make sure that I have my name on them, and also that I have all the new social media platforms that I've started. So my TikTok is on there, and my YouTube is obviously on there as well. And the last thing that I'm going to add to them is that QR code that I talked about earlier in the video that will take them to the custom order form if they want to place an order for something that they didn't see at the market that day. The last goal that I have for future market seasons is one that I have already managed to fail at this go around, and that is to start market prepping sooner. I was still learning how to crochet during the early parts of last year, so I didn't start seriously market prepping until I decided to sign up for markets around like March or April. And the first market that I signed up for was in July, which seems like a long time, but working the 2 jobs, it really turned out not to be. I also think that I didn't realize the speed I needed to work at to build up the inventory that I wanted to take to a market. So I was really not happy with where I was a few weeks out from the market, which led to a lot of late nights of pushing myself to mass produce plushies and make sure that I had that sort of 100 plushie, over 100 plushie target that I wanted to have, which was exhausting and not exactly the stress relief that I set out for crochet to be. I also ended up performing better at markets than I thought I was going to, which is great, but it did mean that I had a lot more to restock between markets than I anticipated I would. And with just a month in between each of the markets I signed up for last year, the turnaround time for me was really quick. So my initial plan for this year was to not schedule any markets until this fall. That way I would have the entire year to prepare my inventory and I wouldn't be stressed and market prepping down to the wire leading into these markets. And I do feel like I was doing that. Like, I've been crocheting pretty much every day unless I had something going on. So I don't quite know what happened. I have to assume that I was maybe like leisurely crocheting and not seriously market prepping up until now, when I'm definitely getting down to the wire. But whatever the issue, that's definitely something that I need and want to work on in the future, so that I'm able to bring the more sewing intensive plushies that I love making to my markets without feeling stressed and crunched for time. That brings us into our last and final segment of today's video, which is some of the lessons that I learned during my first market season. One of the first things I learned pretty much immediately off the bat was that doing markets is a lot harder than I realized from just watching other crocheters on YouTube. I originally chose to sell at local markets because I was working the 2 jobs and I didn't feel like I had the capacity to deal with an online store and things like shipping and turnaround time. Markets just seemed more manageable to me because they're 1 to 2 days. You know when they're scheduled to be. You can prepare your inventory in advance. But it really is a lot of work. Weather can be really hard if you're doing outdoor markets, especially selling plushies. You know, that you don't want them to get wet if it starts raining, and they're really lightweight, so they definitely blow very easily on windy days. There's a lot more physical labor than I expected in doing markets. Getting that tent up and the table set up is really hard, and you're just like on your feet all day long, checking people out and fixing up your booth. I almost never sit the entire weekend, so it's very physically taxing. And there's just so much to invest in and so many other little things that I really didn't think about when I was really deciding that I wanted to sell at markets. Things like you need to get insurance and make sure that you're meeting all of the business requirements of your state. You're getting that sales tax ID. You're submitting your sales tax. None of those things are market specific. You still need to do all of that if you have an online store, just like you have to do all the bookkeeping as well, regardless of how you're selling. But these were just things that I didn't really think about and weren't really factored in my head when I was deciding to sell at local markets. I was just looking to get these plushies out of my apartment, so I definitely didn't quite wrap my head around just how many like other business non-crocheting tasks were going to be involved in the whole process. Bottom line, selling at in-person markets is a lot of fun, and I do highly recommend it to anyone out there who might be watching who's been considering signing up for markets but has been a little bit unsure. Just know that it is a lot more work than it seems like it's going to be at first glance. But you should definitely still do it. Put yourself out there, take the leap. It is really fun. And don't forget to share your journey with me if you do start selling at markets or you are selling at markets. Drop a comment on any of my videos telling me your story, or if you have a channel or a social media platform out there that I should check out, because I love watching those types of videos and hearing about other people's stories while I am crocheting myself. Another thing I took away from my first year is that not everything has to be perfect. And honestly, I am still working on learning this lesson myself. I have always had a hard time sticking with crafts and hobbies because I am just such a perfectionist. I always get hung up on the tiniest, minute imperfections with my work that literally nobody else would notice. And I can tell you, just from this first year alone, they really won't. There were plushies that I absolutely hated because either a eye patch or like a fin was like 0.03 millimeters askew. But those always seemed to be the plushies that people would like run up to and absolutely fall in love with. It can be really hard to remember that we aren't machines or mass production facilities. No plushie is going to be 100% perfect or identical to one another. And honestly, that's part of what people love about handmade products to begin with. So try not to get too hung up on all those like minor little imperfections. Obviously fix any major quality issues or structural problems with your plushie. Don't be putting out ones where the head's half falling off. But outside of that, don't be afraid to put your work out there and share it with the world. You are your own worst critic. I know I am by far my own worst critic. But chances are those little flaws that are keeping you up at night are issues that only you are going to see. And who knows, they might even be the little thing about the plushies that makes somebody fall in love with them. Along similar lines, my last takeaway from this first market season is to make the patterns that you love and bring those plushies with you to your markets. There are always going to be patterns that people are going to really recommend for markets, or patterns that you made that sold really well but you just hate making them. For me, that's mini plushies. I really just do not enjoy making them. Don't get me wrong, they did sell really well at the 2 markets I brought them to last year. But the patterns that I chose, which again is probably on me because I did pick more detailed mini plushies, but they were deceptively more time consuming to make than they looked like they would be at first glance. And I just don't feel that I was getting a good amount of return on them for the amount of time and effort that they took to make. And I didn't really need to push myself to stock up on those lower priced items because my regular size plushies were selling really well. I had just seen so many people say you should have these $5, $8 items at your markets, that those are really what people are looking for. So I kind of forced myself to make them. And this is kind of a controversial take. I am definitely not really bringing a lot of mini plushies with me this go around. I have like a handful that I don't really mind making. But outside of that, I am putting the mini plushies to the side and just focusing on the patterns that I really like to make. Whether I'll ultimately come to regret that once I increase the prices of my regular plushies, I don't know. But at the end of the day, I'm in this business, you're probably in this business, or you might be thinking about getting into this business because you love to crochet. So you don't want to be forcing yourself to make patterns that you hate, or pushing yourself to mass produce 20 of each plushie that you want to bring to your markets, because then you're going to be stressed out and miserable and no longer enjoying the thing that you loved. So make the plushies that you want to make, whether that's low and no-sew patterns, more advanced patterns, a bunch of new patterns that you haven't tried before, whatever it may be. Because if you're making what you love, you're going to be really proud of that product and you're going to want to put it out on your tables and share it with the world. That's all for today's video, but thank you so much for joining me as I reflected on my first market season. My upcoming market season is starting in just a couple weeks, so I know it was really helpful for me to look back on that first year and what I learned from it as I start to prepare for these upcoming markets. And hopefully it was helpful for some of you out there watching this as well. In next week's video, we are going to be doing some market prepping for my first market of 2025. So definitely check that video out if you are a fan of market prep content and you want to see some behind the scenes of what it takes to pull some of these markets off. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel. You can also find me on Instagram and TikTok at the links in the description. As always, thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.